So good evening, welcome to this very new experience, both for me and also for the London Review of Books and the London Review Bookshop. Guten Abend, I should say. Of course, our guest, Andrea Luka Zimmerman, is German tonight, and that also reaches out, I think, a little bit beyond the London-centric filter bubble that I'm in lockdown experiencing currently, to reach out, as this film has done over the last 48 hours, and as the London Review of Books always does, to the world, of course. So welcome wherever you might be watching this from, wherever you're living, wherever you would like to live, of course. Place is a movable feast. We both live within the places we live, and certainly we do now during this current global experience that we're all sharing in, and we live where we would like to be. And those two aspects of both being where you are and also being where you would like to be, changing the world, shall we say, to use a more familiar phrase, are absolutely at the centre of the extraordinary film that we have been watching collectively over the last few days, Here for Life, co-directed by my wonderful guest this evening, Andrea Luka Zimmerman, and the equally remarkable Adrian Jackson, CEO and founding director of the extraordinary theatre company Cardboard Citizens, who work with homeless and formerly homeless people. The film Here for Life has been produced, we're very grateful it has been, by the equally striking international arts agency Artangel. Many thanks to them indeed for supporting, of course, the film from conception through to production, onward into reception. So I welcomed you all, of course, and it is a real pleasure to welcome you. As I said, this is a first-time experience for me. I think Andrea is more familiar with these online conversations, as you'd expect, of course, a major filmmaker to be. But it is also, as I said, a significant first-time experience for the London Review of Books. I say that in terms of the new platform that we've opened, the LRB Screen at Home, which, of course, this is the first in conversation for. Now, some of you might know that we did try this last week, and we've been playing off corporate behemoths against each other after the debacle that was the Zoom open meeting last week. Some of you, of course, will remember that and remember the absolutely remarkable interventions from a bunch of complete idiots, sourced from who knows where, from here, from there, from anywhere. And we have decided to move to an absolutely reliable platform, YouTube, which sadly does not mean that we can engage directly with you as fellow travellers on the remarkable journey that we call life. What we can do, of course, is receive your comments, constructive, we hope, in the usual way that comments can be made to the YouTube platform. And those are going to be relayed to me by a series of alchemical switches, thanks to the two technical and creative giants behind the scenes tonight, Anthony and Sam, who are taking key roles in relaying both the image, the sound, and also the behind-the-scenes necessities to myself, to Andrea, and of course to you, the audience. Without you, we are nothing. I'm very little anyway, even with an audience. Andrea, of course, a major international filmmaker with awards under her belt, is free of any such necessity to be supported by external forces or agents. So I've been going on for some time. Those of you who are familiar with the introductions will know that's a kind of a trick of the trade, or a disaster in waiting that goes with the course that we're normally on. But we're very, very shortly are going to welcome Andrea properly. But before that, we would like to thank the LRB and the LRB Bookshop team and all the various people associated with this extraordinary undertaking, more than 40 years old now, for making this possible. And this, is, as I said, is the first in a series of on-screen conversations, LRB Screen at Home, which will be happening every Wednesday at 7 o'clock UK time. The films will be viewed in the week before. Do sign up, if you haven't already, to the LRB Bookshop newsletter, and you will be the first to receive all the information needed to undertake this wonderful journey with us. We're very glad that you are currently doing that, and welcome, as I said, to all of you from across the world. Now, just to get a sense of a level playing field, we're going to now look, I think, if we can, at the trailer for Here for Life. Now, I should just say at this point, because I will almost definitely forget it later, the trailer was made for the production team by the filmmaker Andrew Cotting, who, in an incredible synchronicity, almost worthy of a kind of beautifully benign tarot deck hand, is the filmmaker of the film that's following next week. More on that at the end, of course, at a suitable point relay from this event through to the next one in waiting. But now let's have a look at the trailer for Here for Life.
Stallions! 3, 2, 1. Back off! Back off!
don't hunt
into
fish.
just the semantics of it. You know what we mean? The fish are going
No,
around,
it's not to
and
do
you
with
go
semantics.
after them. You go after them with sharp objects.
It's not an argument.
No, it's not an argument. Sorry, I don't mean my voice to sound like
it's an open discussion.
My voice sounds rowdy, but I don't feel rowdy in the slightest.
Let it fry, fish to fry, fish to fry, fish to fry, Santa Fe and fry, Santa Fe and fry, fish to fry, fish to fry, fish to fry. Why they got to lie when too many fish to fry? Satisfy, satisfaction, easy, man of action, Rasta man a chant, ancient a chant, rock is not slack, pussy and just suspended.
I'm afraid of annihilation.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. Obviously, I'll be thanking you more fully next week when you are joining us for your own film, The Whalebone Box. But many thanks indeed for that. I should just say at this point that I am actually wearing a jacket that has been given to me by Andrew Cotting. I would like to obviously build as much reference material and layered textural intervention into obviously the YouTube frame that I'm currently occupying, and I'm sure those themes will continue during the course of the series. But now please welcome Andrea. Andrea, a pleasure that you can join us.
Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure, and thank you so much for a wonderful film, and obviously for enabling the LRB Screen at Home initiative to show it. We're going to be talking obviously about the film, how it came about, challenges, intentions, and so on. And we're delighted, of course, as you already know, that two of the key fellow collaborators with you on the film, Errol McGlashan, who's a performer in the film, a key character, and your co-director, if you like, your kind of your collaborator for many years in all sorts of different ways. Therese Henningsen, herself an artist filmmaker, is also with us watching this at this moment. But we will be bringing in specially recorded clips by both of them a little later in the evening. So just to reach out to those of you who have just joined us, this is an In Conversation with Andrea Luka Zimmerman, and we'll be running for no more than the next 45 minutes or so. Thank you very much for joining, if you just have. So Andrea, this is a major film about London. It's an innovative hybrid work. It straddles documentary and fiction. It borrows from artist film and experimental filmmaking more widely. It uses different strategies to kind of convey its story, its narratives, and its characters. And it definitely stands outside the more familiar kind of body of documentary work that has only been growing over the last few years, which engages with the changing nature of the city, London in particular, but obviously cities more widely. So you have brought a very particular approach to this. Could you give us a sense of where the kind of the seed impulse for this work first lay?
So initially it started with both Adrian Jackson and I making a work with John Berger on his book King. And I made a film with John and Adrian made a play. And so he saw the film at the London Film Festival and he approached me and he said, if I wanted to, if we could collaborate on a project. So we came up with, and I mean, I've known about Adrian and I've known about Auguste Boal, which is the kind of deep philosophy behind forum theatre and theatre of the oppressed that Adrian is using with Cardboard Citizens for many years. And I've applied quite a lot of these approaches to play, but political play and the poetry of every day in my film work. So it seemed like a natural collaboration waiting to happen. And so we proposed a project to think through what might it mean to live in London today, because London has all these different layers to it. So on the one hand, London, the neoliberal bastion city of finance capital, but there are all sorts of different Londons that coexist and that don't really mix with each other in a way that would be really beautiful. So we tried to think through what does it mean actually to take refuge in a place where there are a lot of people present. So it was a very, very long process. It took about 4.5 years to make this film. because we also worked very much in collaboration with all the participants. Once we had the troupe together, we were thinking through what is the right to even claim poetry, because often people, especially people perhaps on the margins of, on income margins, of lower income margins or working class realities, are often portrayed through the through the realist lens, right? So there's always this kind of a particular aesthetic, especially in the UK, or within Anglo-American cinema, I think, which is always realism, and it's always just hard to go down to the point. So there's no dreaminess, there's no poetry. And for me, what is really important, coming from that background myself, we have a claim to poetry. I think the way in which people express themselves and the way in which people hold their bodies is, for me, very beautiful. It shows the vulnerability, but also the obstinacy and the refusal to just be victimized. We are victimizing people and marginalizing people through the structures that are profoundly violent, right? But also, we are erasing again people's image. We're erasing people's histories, her stories, I stories. We literally need to reclaim the space in all its multiplicity and beauty. So that's kind of how the project started, and to try and find a way that is looking at difficult subject matters, but also, also with the joy and the resistance or resilience, but actually obstinacy, waywardness, I call it often, to imagine history otherwise together and to claim a space of beauty and care and tenderness with each other. So it was a process that had this as an ambition, but we didn't know quite how to go about it. And then it was devised over all these years together.
Well, thank you. I think our work here is done. That was the first LRB Screen at Home conversation with Andrea Luka Zimmerman, and arguably one of the fullest answers that has yet been carried on this particular platform. Thank you so much. I mean, that's a tremendous setup that lays out some of the kind of practical encounters with the beginning of the project, but also, of course, some of the deeper thematics. Now, you mentioned John Berger there, obviously a key friend of the London Review of Books, the London Review Bookshop, and also an earlier collaborator with Archangel himself in several projects. A figure, I think, for all of us, particularly at this time, who constantly inspires and energizes and forces us to become more rigorous with our thinking. I should say that in the spirit of John Berger, and certainly in the spirit of your absolutely wonderful answer, we're doing these screenings because of the times we find ourselves in, not just because it's no longer possible at the moment to do events live in person at the bookshop, but also because these times require a certain kind of response, a certain kind of reflection, a form of thinking out loud together as much as we can about the times in which we find ourselves in, and particularly about the better times that we might find ourselves in afterwards, not just a return to kind of everyday business as usual, and particularly in its most negative connotations. So Here for Life is a great film to start with, of course, the double meaning of its title in all sorts of ways, which I'm sure we'll come on to later as well. So thank you very much, Andrea. Wonderful opening answer. But could you just take it a little bit further for us, this idea of how we think about community? I know it's not a word that you would necessarily reach for as the primary way of thinking about how we live together. Right? You've spoken elsewhere about forms of coexistence as perhaps being more kind of energizing and more active than simply imagining a community of geographical proximity. But give us a sense really of how you think about coexistence and how that then led you to create this temporary community, shall we say, of the film.
I think the temporary is a very crucial term before community, because community is, by how I see community, or I have seen it used in my life, it's also exclusive. So it has the potential for something beautiful, but it's also got with it the potential to exclude absolutely. So to come across each other and fall across each other with difference, I often talk about coexistence or temporary communities which form themselves for a purpose and then they reshape themselves in different ways. And so we were filming in a place called the Nomadic Community Gardens, which is just not even 10 minutes walk from Liverpool Street Station, and just wedged behind Brick Lane between two train tracks. And that place is now gone. It doesn't exist anymore. And it was a space that was very beautiful. It was self-built a little bit. It reminded me always of the manor house allotments that used to exist before the Olympic Parks in Hackney Wick. And so all the buildings that existed in the nomadic gardens were built by the people who used the gardens. It was self-organized. There was no police there. It was very free and vibrant across race, gender, age. It was beautiful. And they had open mics. They had Para Carnival. Everybody could just participate and use the space. And Selim, who built a theatre space there, allowed us to use it as a hub for rehearsals and for everything. And Jono, who's one of our actors, used to also do loads of workshops in the nomadic garden. So we thought it was like a temporary autonomous zone almost. That could be a character too for how we thought about coming together. Even though we wouldn't not necessarily meet, especially within these bubbles we have nowadays, like everything is geared towards your own tastes, right? So how do you really wedge open these spaces? So I always crave that, like going into a library and falling into a different book than I would have gone in for and stuff like this. So the nomadic community gardens were a place where all these different communities existed, but also they had to coexist. And so our community, in a way, temporary community, fitted right in there, and performed, and we had an audience, and we contributed and we participated in all sorts of different things there. So
tremendous, thank you. You mentioned obviously falling into a book, but I think you actually have fallen into something yourself very recently, haven't you? Because we should draw attention, of course, to the mark on your left cheek. Could you fill us in a little bit about that, if it's worth knowing about?
Oh, it was a tree. I'm very dreamy and I don't usually fall over though. So I was looking at my dog playing with another dog, and it was a massive, massive dog, and my dog's pretty big. And I was just looking at them and I was so happy. And then I fell over a little fence into a tree. And it was a small tree, and it was really bleeding, and this was here too. Anyway.
Oh dear, I'm very sorry to hear that. Small tree, of course, with big ambitions. I mean, trees are particularly irritating when they start moving, of course, which they occasionally do when our backs are turned. And so that obviously would have added to the challenge. But I'm really sorry. I hope you obviously feel better with that soonest. You mentioned, obviously, nomadic gardens quite close to Liverpool Street Station. We should say, of course, for those not so familiar with East London, that Liverpool Street Station is not in Liverpool, and the street so named does not go anywhere near the City of the North. Just for those geographical clarifications, I think always important to know. So thank you very much. Yeah, really important to hear about nomadic gardens, and there are questions related to that, I think, that we'll come on to a little bit later, and hopefully we'll get a glimpse of it as well, a little bit more. But that's somewhere that's gone. It's certainly embodied the kind of values and the ways of working that you're certainly drawn to. But once you got this kind of this temporary autonomous zone in place, and you've got your performers, how did you start devising this work? Because it was obviously a devised work. It had these theatrical inspirations and forms of theatrical engagement as part of its working method. But of course, it's also a film, crucially. It's not a piece of theatre filmed for circulation in different medium. It is actually a fully embodied cinematic work. So you were balancing two media, but also you were balancing forms of performance and expectation from your company. How did that develop?
I mean, it's a really tricky and complex. It's very difficult for actors to cross boundaries both between theatre and film at the same time. So it's a huge challenge for actors because theatre is a profoundly loud space. So you project outwards into the audience, and it's live, and it's all about being with each other together. Whereas cinema is quiet. Right, you make a space where things can happen and unfold within them. So even if it's what people call documentary, so I come from documentary making, but for me, documentary making has never been expository, because I don't believe, even if you just by how you frame, you're already making certain decisions. So it always comes from a certain perspective. And I also try and figure out always what are other ways in which we can tell these stories that are more complex. And that they can even be, that they can repurpose stories that we might know to explore the underlying myths that become erasures or oppressive, but also freeing at the same time. So the devising started in many different ways. So it was naturally, because Adrian is a theatre maker, that he would write something. So the play became almost a response, an echo, like a skeleton almost, the rehearsal for a play that never is fully realized. We never see the full play. And I'm quite interested also in the making of and in looping of stories. So the play in itself has some core elements in it that are looped throughout the film several times, 3 times each. So one is for those viewers who have seen the film, the bunker scenes, the ones which are, very carefully lit and hyper real, staged. And then the kind of dream sequences, which are also hyper real, even though they might look like they're documentary material, and then the documentary material as well. So they're kind of looping in and out of each other in order to look at what is performance, who are we, and what is storytelling. I think the main driving force for us was to explore what storytelling actually is. And is it lyrical? Is it poetic? Is it the archetypal stories that we tell that become universal? Or is storytelling also that which opens up gaps for the imagination of the viewer to enter? So we started from, I don't know how much detail you want. Would you like me to go into how we started, or?
Well, why don't we hold that? I'd like to give you, you to give us an example of maybe, a particular scene and how that develops. Let's take one as a kind of case study briefly. But let's now have a look, if we could, at the first clip. Let's go to clip 2, if we could. Could you just set that up for us before we see it?
Oh, sorry, me. Yes, sorry. Yeah, I will.
Just give us a sense, if you could. Yeah.
Yeah, the first clip is Richard Hannigan, and Richard. You will see shortly what he is talking about in the clip. But what I really loved about this scene was it's in a way documentary, but it was also performative, right? So we already had been filming for quite some time, and it was very, very, spending a lot of time with the actors, sometimes just me and Therese for a long period of time, sometimes me and Adrian, sometimes all of us together, sometimes bigger teams, sometimes smaller. So with Richard, we had been filming, Therese and I, for a while. And so he kind of already thought through how does he want to also show himself and what is important for him to show, especially around notions of poverty, because all of the actors have experienced extreme forms of poverty at some points in their life. And what does it mean in relationship to the kind of bigger structures and other people in places that have it even less good than us? So anyway, better show the clip and then I continue after.
Great, thank you. Let's see clip 2 now. Thank you.
From the time when I had very little and I was buying $1 bill, I used to go to the post office sometimes and buy $1. $1 is the mark of poverty in the world.
So
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, please continue.
So the idea of $1 is the mark of poverty. What I really love about all of the people in the film, and I think this is also why it became a film and why we chose to work together. We tell our individual stories and we look at our stories perhaps as starting points, but the stories, we don't live in isolation. We also live within the larger community of the world and other people. And so each of these sequences or scenes that are in the film had to also do this function. So the function of the specific, but also the function of the larger picture. And I think for me, this is what happens in that scene, very much so.
No, that's great. I'm particularly drawn to your last point in relation to one of the questions that has been sent to us. This gives me a good opportunity to remind all of you who are watching or listening that you can, of course, send in questions via the YouTube comment opportunity, if you like, on the screen, and they are being relayed directly to me. And one of the earlier questions actually that was sent in was from Jill Barker, where she talks about whether you were making, obviously you were making and telling specific stories, but also aspiring to a kind of universal sense of narrative. And I think you know that now. But going on from that, there's really raw life experience in here on the part of the majority of the performers, which has been obviously translated, has been translated transformed through the act of making, whether theatrically or cinematically, into a different space where stories are often passed over to another character to tell, or inhabited by another of the performers. But how was the experience of first of all building a sense of trust and security for the performers, that they're often difficult and challenging lives could be held and be told safely to a wider public?
I think it's interesting that this question keeps coming up because, you know, it's a film, and the stories are worked with. So the stories are not primary stories where I go out and see somebody in trauma and I ask them about their trauma and then it ends up in a film. These stories are worked through, often in some cases for many, many years, by the performers themselves. The performers are very used to sharing their stories. So Cardboard Citizens, for example, most of the productions are based in some way or another on situations of people's life experiences within these structures of survival. And so all I needed to do was what we needed to do is bring to the fore the stories that can become, that are in a way archetypal stories. Like they are like, I really get drawn to fairy tales or archetypes because they become, in the positive sense, universal, not universal from, like, say, the white male middle class perspective universal, but from the kind of perspective of coexistence where I might understand. And so I go back a tiny little bit. Auguste Boal's methodology, why I was also drawn to it, was that he was developing a way of empathy making, a radical theater practice that could also produce empathy across different experiences, to have a recourse to another experience that might be quite extreme, but without erasing that experience of the other person. So often what we do in this culture or in cultural production is, so through empathy, we erase another's experience because we took from a particular perspective. So what Auguste Boal was trying to do is to create empathy in plurality. So what we did then was to share a lot of stories, but people, there's a very simple method, which often also actors might use in general, but you share a story, then another person stands up and tells the story in the first person. And if they cannot remember certain details, they might be able to fill in those details because they themselves also had similar experiences, right? So this is how you make another story out of your story. And you hear the story told back to you by another person. And then you can start working with that story. So I'm much, much less interested in direct trauma. So for example, I'm not a filmmaker who could watch an accident and not help. I couldn't just film it. I would have to put the camera down, right? Which I've done loads. So I'm not that kind of filmmaker. So I have to really work with people over long periods of time. So it becomes cinema, right? So even though the stories might seem raw, but that's because they're performed in that way. They're really worked through. They're really brilliant, excellent actors, you know? So the credit goes to them to be able to show these stories in that way. And some of the stories, like Patrick's father being murdered, you know, they're old, they're long ago, but the emotion is so real because the trauma, of course, etches something in your mind. But when you want to tell this story, because you want to have the story known, but also you think this is an important story to say something about who you are in this context of this film, it's a very beautiful gift that the actors brought to it.
Well, it is indeed. It is indeed. Thank you so much for that, you know, really warm and supportive answer. Let's take another look at the film, if we could. I think let's look at clip number 5 and just set this one up for us, because I was struck at the beginning of the conversation when you talked about a different kind of filmic response to the challenges we find ourselves in, the cities, the experience of cities in London and obviously globally. And, you know, you used the idea of a sort of a dream space, a non-realist space in some form, or some kind of expression of that. And of course, Estate was also titled Estate a Reverie, which suggests a kind of waking dream of experience of both of obviously a place of coexistence and of the larger city. So there's something in this next clip, I think, some spirit of that's continued into Here for Life, isn't there?
Definitely, and I think this is it goes back to the claim to poetry, you know, the way in which we articulate something that is not educated out of us. To me, is very beautiful. And I left school very young, and then I went back to school when I was much older. But like the way in which I used to speak. So in my own language, you would know my class, but you would also know kind of that I didn't grow up with a proper way of speaking. And for me, this has always been very strong and beautiful, actually, this kind of way of expressing. You know, and we are all articulate in our own ways, but it's about the nuances of stuff and ways of being and ways of dreaming. And this next sequence, which is with Richard and Patrick, came out of a, so I did these auditions. So auditions were also for the film in order to, let's see if we have auditions in the film. So it's a kind of self-reflexive way of making. And Richard said he had never been to the sea. And I remember just looking at Therese, and it was like, we have to go to the sea. So Therese and Adrian and I went to Dungeness with Richard and Patrick and my dog. And we had because we needed a scene of friendship. And maybe we just watch it and then we talk further.
That'd be great. Let's look at it now.
I always wanted to go to India, never managed it. I've done a bit of travelling. Never got to the one place I really wanted to go to. I went to Northern Ireland a couple of years ago, which was great. Strange place, weird place.
The audience. So thank you so much. I mean, Dungeness is a wonderful place, of course. Derek Jarman, the late, great Derek Jarman, very much a kindred spirit of yours, I think, in terms of modesty of resource, but hugeness of imagination and ambition, made his final home very close to where you were filming, and created a garden, you know, out of pebbles, which I think is, you know, a great actuality, but also a metaphor for creativity of extremists. So that was absolutely a wonderful scene, but that form of reverie took a number of kind of locational expressions, didn't it? It was obviously, Dungeness was an exceptional space in terms of the film's narrative, but you also had a regular space that you returned to yourself.
So just the last word on Dungeness. So we went there precisely because of Derek Jarman, and I do these mini references in all my work. So in Estate, for example, I referenced Jonah will be 20 in the year. It's the third level, the attic. We wanted to have the condensation, the really core of all of these things together, of all these themes. So we chose another space, a space that was very carefully lit, and it was very carefully devised, where that was acted. Everything was acted, but it was also acted in a kind of strange way. For example, I mean, you can just see an example of a condensation of one of the scenes between Winga and Jonah. Maybe we just watch it and then we can just talk a little bit about it. It's the
clip number
the one
5.
before the one. Sorry.
How does it feel? Is it hurting?
A bit. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's the pain?
In the middle of the foot.
Where that big scar is.
No, I have pins in my legs. It's fine.
Pain leaves scars, doesn't it?
Thank you so much. Just to welcome those of you who have joined us during the course of this in conversation with the filmmaker Andrea Luka Zimmerman about her wonderful film, Adrian Jackson, Here for Life. This is the first in conversation of the new initiative, LRB Screen at Home, from the London Review of Books. And my name is Gareth Evans. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this event. So we just saw there a clip from Here for Life, and apologies if there was a little bit of drop in the signal in the answer before that clip, where Andrea, of course, was talking about a form of an entirely purely or only rational one, occupied a kind of third space between dream and reality. a kind of bunker reality where it's to their essence. And I think, Andrea, you mentioned there, of course, forms of homage, shall we say, to filmmakers who have been informed and inspired you. Jeunesse with nod to Derek Jarman, and you mentioned just now the feed with Alana, who 5 in the evening, to Here for Life. And in a way that brings us to one of the intentions perhaps for the film, because clearly we're choosing this film, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, because it speaks to our time, if not directly, then associatively, creatively, imaginatively, to the time we find ourselves in very specifically now, but also, of course, to a larger historical moment and movement. So there's a sense that there's a kind of radical hope in the film. While the lives of some of the performers, their characters are challenging and difficult, the fact of their creative response and their resistance to their circumstances, their resilience within them, obviously itself offers a form of hope. But just give us a sense, if you can, of your kind of your hopes for the film.
So I only understood, give us a sense of your hope for the film. There was a little cut out.
So I'm just basically talking about the kind of radical hope that you're getting. And just asking about some of your intentions for that kind of project.
Yeah. So I think my big intention is to always to make counter memories, to make memories that can lay claim to the imagination and our collective imagination, but our coexisting imagination, and specifically I think around underrepresented people, especially in relation to working class or marginalized communities. That's really important to me, and non-group identity in that sense, but falling into each other, because that's very much of my life experience, and I don't really see that represented in a way that I feel part of. So therefore I have to, in a way, make it in that way. So my hope is also I really like this idea of like a radical hopefulness, but it's also around a radical tenderness, really. Tenderness for each other. And if we actually starting from the point, like there was a conversation a couple of weeks ago with Reclaim the Frame I did with Len Sissi, who was talking about the absence of touch and like how do you deal with that when you had no touch as a child? And I had no touch as a child, for example. And I know there are a lot of people in this film who had very difficult childhoods too. So how does this bring a mark on our bodies and bring a mark on our minds and the way in which we are with each other, without, and I really want to say this again, without being seen or made as victims or re-marginalized by the larger streams of culture or society. It's a refusal, an absolute refusal to be that, but it's a saying, this is our lives, this is us, and this is what we can do, and this is how good we can perform, but also this is how we have joy, and this is how we refuse to even participate. So the first audience, for example, for my work are the people who are in it, as well as myself, obviously, but are the people in it and are the people, and not necessarily high culture in the sense that we understand high culture to be, even though, of course, these spaces also are important because they can change things, they can change ways of thinking. For me, art has beautiful possibilities, right? But it just needs to have different voices within it spoken much more. And I mean, maybe it would be a good time now to show the last clip, because it shows some of the debates which people got into in making of the film in relation again to the outwards structures that are making their lives very difficult through financialization.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. Absolutely. Let's do that now. Let's see the final clip. Thank you.
You said if you just do all this like mantra thing the universe provides for everyone, yeah? Is there enough to go around?
Yes.
So a child slave chocolate worker in the Ivory Coast just has to say the mantra and everything will be okay.
No. It's not as simple as that.
How we know that they belong to you? What's the starting point that this belongs to you? Why you have 500 houses and I don't have even a square to live? Like, why? Who's gonna define that this is yours and mine? And how this money became to you? How this money go to you? Does this money have blood or not? So I'm the thief after.
thank you so much for suggesting that we see that clip particularly. I mean, that is a really distinctive and innovative addition, or a kind of embodiment of some of the themes and intentions you have for the work. At the end of the film, we see the audience for the play within the film obviously giving their own responses, which ripple out almost immediately out to the audience and, of course, beyond into the world. These are perennial questions, but given such brilliant form and kind of framing by the context of the film. So thank you very much indeed for that. I think start looking, perhaps a suitable link at the audience questions that have come in over the last half an hour or so, and several were sent in earlier in the day. Just to remind you, questions to the LRB, directly to the LRB Bookshop via their general email during the course of the week before this conversation, while you're watching the film in question, or of course you can comment on YouTube on the day as the event is unfolding, and the questions to me. Now, some of them have been answered, I think, by Andrea in her very full and extensive replies, but I think I might mention, and I particularly mention here Lana Lynn, the American filmmaker who you yourself have worked with, who was a great admirer of this film of yours, taking on a little bit, I think, from what we talked about with Reverie, in a sort of different kind of way of presenting reality. Asked if you could just talk a little bit more about the look that you were seeking in the film, both the kind of the look and feel, both visually, obviously in a larger way.
So if I start sonically first, so we worked with Marie Tuege, is an amazing sound designer, and it was such a privilege to be able to actually afford to work with people I wanted to work with on this project. And Marie's sound design, what I really love about her way of making is everything that is not captured in a way that I wanted it to Foley on. So there's a very intricate sound design of breath, many insects, many sounds that you would assume are natural sounds, but they're really not. And we made them on purpose rather than using the real sounds in order to create a slightly heightened space, but it's not heightened enough that it will detract you. So it was a very delicate way of working. And we treated it almost as a symphony. And, even though it does look realistic enough, it really wasn't. And it makes a huge difference. And that kind of level of work, you need the support. And we were lucky to have had the support, and that was amazing. And then in terms of the camera, I really love filming, and I work also with an incredible cinematographer called Tina Gallis. She's awesome, and I've worked with her on 2 films now before. So I film most of the stuff that I do, but some scenes I cannot film by myself. So Tina will come in, or some things I just don't know how to do, and Tina is the one who knows how to do them. She's like my twin or something, but much better than me, right? Technically, to start with, and everything else. So she did all the bunker scenes, and she did the complicated big scenes for us. Sometimes we did 2 cameras. I did the second camera, and most of the time she did one, and then me and Adrian could focus on directing. But the camera I used, we had the choice, right, to have less days with the actors and use a really gorgeous camera with vintage lenses, which are what I really wanted originally. But we just couldn't get the deal that I needed, basically free. Over such a long period of time, it's not possible, right? So I said, okay, I'm going to work with my own personal vintage lenses. And then Grant G, who also was the editor of the film, he lent us his vintage lenses, which are the same as mine. And we shot on a camera that cost £500. And we just got adapters and did the imperfect way of shooting. And it was really, really, really tricky. I mean, I knew I could get a really beautiful image in that way. But what was very tricky is when you work with that kind of technology to get focused right. It was, I think, I now know how to focus in a way that I think most focus pullers don't know how to focus pull. These cameras are so tricky, and the lenses are so tiny and they're made for completely different chips. So you see every little fragment. But we kind of managed it, and it was sheer will. I wanted to just show, you know, this industry, I do it regardless of what they ask me. I can do it with nothing. And we did it. And then we had more money to pay actors for more days. And that was the most important thing for us all.
Tremendous. Thank you so much. So we really do see the budget and we hear the budget, should we say, on screen,
but
which
also,
is great.
No, sorry, I wanted to say, we can, just because you have no money doesn't mean you have to have realism again. You can do anything. We can do anything. And I wanted to really show and demonstrate that you can make beauty with nothing, you know?
And you absolutely prove that. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm really glad that you were able, of course, to name check some of your other key collaborators, Tyner, Grant, and so on, who obviously were instrumental in the success of the work as well. I'd like now to bring in response actually to one of the audience questions, one of your key collaborators. We've already named her, Therese Henningsen, Danish artist filmmaker who's worked with you on many projects over the last 10 years. She will be providing now a clip that we'll very shortly see, which in a way answers the question that Jill Barker asked a little while ago. What's with the horse? It's a good question. It's a larger question. Arguably, it's even a philosophical question. What is with the horse? Which horse, of course, and what is it with it now? Made by Therese, who was actually filming a lot behind the scenes, a kind of making of as the film was being made, setting things up, setting location visits up, etc. And hopefully the horse question is answered in this clip, as well as the pleasure of hearing from Therese as well now. Thank you.
I'm Therese, and I want to show you a short clip from behind the scenes location scouting for a horse riding scene in Brixton. And for me, it shows quite well the slightly anarchic production process, and Errol at some point said it's better to ask for forgiveness and permission.
What are you guys doing right now?
What do you think the best road to ride a horse in Brixton would be?
Horse?
Yeah, a horse, yeah. I'm not riding it, you know what I mean?
A horse in Brixton?
This road would be fine to walk a horse down. In fact, I cannot think of a road that wouldn't be fine to walk a horse down. But yes, it would be a lovely, wonderful place to ride a horse through, I believe. The reason being is because you don't usually get horses in things like this. It sounds like something of the Musketeers when they're chasing someone down. The clippity-clop of the hooves would really echo because it's inside.
But this is nice with those buildings, no rounding.
Oh right, so it's not something I would have noticed, but yeah.
But like the round when you walk through
here,
here,
that does look good. You know, like in 21 Days when he wakes up and there's no one around, just empty, and he's on the horse going, hello, hello. There's no one around, middle of the day. Why would that be? Why would it be? We're gonna run right through Electric Avenue.
That's electric.
Whereas that wouldn't be so easier, because if you're walking a horse down here in the day where there's lots of people, we are talking health and safety. And I'm not one for fucking health and safety. I would just, but you know, like when it's presented, everyone's going to think about that. Me personally, I would just get the horse and walk it down there anyway, and just say to people, watch out, you know what I mean?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Therese, for making that clip for us, and for your own words introducing it. Forgiveness always better than permission. Of course, that's a lesson that I've fully taken on board in most of my life, desiring hopefully to spread it to all areas of my existence. Try something first and try and get some coverage later. Seems to me a very good way to go. Now, moving on to the remaining questions. There are three very interesting questions that we have left now this evening for you, and we will be finishing just before 8 o'clock. Thank you for staying with us for this in conversation with Andrea Luka Zimmerman, LRB Screen at Home, for her film Here for Life, made with Adrian Jackson. So the next question, Andrea, is from Monica Sanders. She's been joining us and watching the film from Brussels. So many thanks, Monica, for that, and welcome to you now. She very much enjoyed the film, but she was curious about some of the footage that clearly was not the majority of the filmmaking that you've described already. Let's call it found footage. And she draws attention to the scene with the bike lock and the police arrest. And I just wondered if you could let us know how that came about and what your decisions were around including it, but also how much it was staged or otherwise.
So the bike theft scene came from... We were looking at when we have done something that when something has been stolen from us or taken from us, or when we have taken something from someone else. So we were working always with these kind of big themes: loss, greed, transgression, mourning, desire, for example. So anyway, and then one of them, a big theme throughout the film, were bicycles, because in London, so at one point the film was called Cycle. That was a working title. So there were a lot of bicycles. We followed loads and loads of bicycle stories, bicycle couriers, bicycle, all the bicycles where you see a wheel been left when the rest of the bike has been stolen. There are hundreds of those. You see them usually on the weekends when the markets are, or used to be. But that particular scene was Errol going to have to steal his own bike or break open the lock of his own bike because he had lost the key. And somebody filmed it. And then he showed us that footage. And we used the footage. It just made complete sense. That's how that footage came about. So it was Errol in a real situation. And that's what I guess a lot of people like him would face, when they are in broad daylight with a hammer trying to open a lock, and especially, in that neighborhood. So it wasn't a surprise to him that would happen. And so we wanted to use this footage in the film. And it's also, his reaction is also really amazing. It's feisty, in light of all of this. So, yeah, that's how that footage.
Thank you very much. And yeah, it certainly is feisty. And Errol himself is a feisty character. And I think that's the perfect moment to bring in Errol's own contribution now, recorded earlier today, in response to asking him how his experience was really in making the film. So let's have a look at Errol's own short film now, if we could. Thank you very much.
Oh, greetings, people. Hope you enjoyed the film. Yes, this is Errol McGlashan, aka Uncle Errol. I'm giving you a little chit chat. I don't even know what to say, but I'm going to say something. So I really enjoyed being in this film. I learned a lot about myself. I've learned also not to be so self-conscious about myself and the stuff I've done and that, Or all your life experiences is what makes drama, is what makes film, is what makes life interesting. And to hide from them and to hide but from some of the things that you've said and done, is hiding from yourself. I'll give you an example. There was, Andrea gave us a chance to veto parts of the film that we didn't like. So she brought us in one by one, showed us footage of ourselves. And there was this part where I'm having a go at Sasha. Sasha in the film, the older lady, and I'm saying to her, "You're an old bag. That's why you do not understand." We was arguing about flat earth. I used to be a flat earth believer. Yeah, I'm not anymore, but it was a phase I went through. All right, we all go through phases, and we're having this big argument, And she's going to me, "Oh, shut up. Oh, shut up." And I said, "Why the fuck should I shut up just because an old lady is telling me to?" And I'm having a go at her, and this is filming, because the thing about Andrea, she films everything. So she'll film you, whether we're acting or not, she's filming it, And then when I saw it, I thought, oh, that leaves me in a bad light. I said, no, get rid of that. I'm already talking about beating up my daughter and everything, so you can get rid of that. But now I think about it, I was being self-conscious, and I've said it in other screenings or questions or answers that Andrea should have been a bit more pushy on me about that, because I would have let it in, because it makes the film, because Andrea talks about getting old, and also I worry about getting old, I look at areas of my face and I'm thinking, and there's a voice inside my head saying, "You old bastard, you're getting old," don't be walking down Brixton looking at fucking women in their 20s, you're an old git, and so that could have been looked at as that I was the voice in Sasha's head, saying, "You're old, you don't understand, no one cares what you're going to say." So yes, it's a lesson for me. I really enjoyed being in the film, and I'm grateful to have been part of it. And I know this is over 90 seconds, and I've already tried 3 times. I give up, I cannot do anything in 90 seconds. There's nothing in this world that takes 90 seconds. So either show it all or fucking cut bits up. All right? Nice one, Gareth. Oi, oi. All right, speak to you later.
Many thanks, Errol, for giving us that. Wonderful to see you on screen. And of course, thank you so much for all your incredible work in the film. Uncle Errol. Errol's an award-winning spoken word performer and artist, so do track him down in all the usual ways and do support him if you can. Artists of all kinds need support at this time. So we're just moving in. Many thanks for staying with us on this first LRB Screen at Home in conversation with Andrea Luka Zimmerman. And we just got a couple more questions from the audience. Many thanks to all of you who have sent questions in. And this is from Kathy Watson. Kathy was wondering how much you and Adrian have been influenced by the work of Charles Dickens. And she says this particularly in the sense that, of course, Charles Dickens, a very famous writer about London as well as obviously much else, but with a great empathy and sympathy for the poor, those kind of marginalised and outside the mainstream of things. So she just wondered what you what Dickens played for you, a key role or not.
So for us, it really came from the people. It came from people's experience. So we didn't go into any way of how other people would speak about us. We really tried to explore how can we speak.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, absolutely working with the people you're working with, rather than sort of bringing another cultural reference in before that. Would that be right? That's it. Yeah. Thank you very much. Right, we're now moving into the final couple of questions. I think I'll put these together because in a way they seem to feel like they are related. So Saina, I hope that's pronounced right. Saina sent a question in from YouTube and said, you mentioned a particular moral dimension peculiar to London. I don't mean judgmental. This is Saina speaking, of course. Were you conscious of a moral stance? And I think let's hold that and bring in Lauren's question as well, because I think they kind of are related. Laurel was intrigued by what you said earlier in the conversation about the idea of community as perhaps being exclusive. So we have a sense of a kind of moral dimension in London, perhaps a moral stance as a filmmaker, and alongside that, a sense of a sense of community as being exclusive. Could you bring those together for us, if that's possible?
So I think these are very good points as well. I mean, Umberto Eco said that, you can use the same words in the same order and mean exactly the opposite thing. So for me, I think I'm, in a way, I mean, I don't really think about morality, but I think about coexistence a lot, and I think about community a lot. And when I talk about community as being exclusive, that's the type of community that is often coming to the fore in a certain way. I'm not talking by any means at all about, say, my community that is really crucial to my survival. That's a different kind of community, in that I want to have that exclusive also, for example, my friendship circle, or whatever it's called, whatever these languages are. But it comes much more from perhaps a sense of, because I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I remember extreme expulsions of people from community because of the occurrence of AIDS and HIV in particular. So it was formative for me, the sense of how people can be shunned out just because they no longer belong, because of what they're perceived to be, because they're perceived to be a threat, for example. So it comes much more from there. And then how culturally we have often said, oh, these are community projects, these are this project. What is a community? When you talk about community project in terms of, say, arts funding, this is always the big question I have, right? It's like, what does it actually mean? Does it mean you work with real people on a long sustained project? Absolutely. Is it proper engagement with people on their terms? Absolutely. But just calling it community, that's how I have a problem with, right? Do you know what I mean? So it's a language, it's a way of how we use certain languages. So, and I want to absolutely also say that community is also incredible and amazing and crucial to our survival. But the kind of way in which I talk about communities as being exclusive is very specific, where we can say, this is not for you, go away. In public space, for example, homeless people are not allowed to sit on the benches, even though they're public funded, if it's in a public park, for example. Then there's a sense of morality. I think maybe I don't like people having a moral high ground, let's say. But at the same time, what other things do we have than to do or inquire about the things that don't do harm to others? So it's about trying to find a mutuality, to find a space where we can speak and breathe and be with each other without being erased and without being denied the possibility to participate, which we do to the majority of people who live in this country. They're not allowed to speak, right? And suddenly they're important, and now, let's listen to their voices. It's that kind of way of thinking. I think I wish for a different world. And all the films that I've made, starting with Tashkafa, very, very strongly so. That was the starting point for me to really be conscious of it, working with John Berger. I want to reframe the lens slightly, tilting it a little bit to see what might be possible if you just looked at it slightly differently. That doesn't mean to deny the brutality of some of the realities that we're facing, but also to show the tenderness and care that is so often made invisible because it doesn't fit, or it's not fit for purpose for a certain type of cultural dominant mainstream narrative. So marginalized narratives are probably the way forward, finding our own communities and refinding them again and again, but a different way of community, a community that is there to the survival of, of each other, that's watching out for each other properly, that kind of thing.
Tremendous. Well, thank you so much. Another world is possible, a better world is possible, of course. We hope coming out of the global coronavirus pandemic, but we hope so anyway, and independently of that, because of course the struggles and the challenges we face are enormous. We have to face them collectively together, whatever we decide to call that collectivity. And many, many thanks indeed, Andrea, for sharing your wonderful thoughts and insights, and of course your great film, Here for Life, with us and with the LRB Screen at Home initiative. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Many thanks to everyone for their questions. I'm really glad that we've been able to reach out internationally. As I said, Monica from Brussels, and Lauren with the last question coming from South Africa. So many, many thanks to you and to everyone else for your questions and for watching. So before we go, we'd just like to give you a little taster of the film that will be coming up this coming week. The LRB shop will be sending out their newsletter globally, of course, to everybody. But we're very, very sorry, particularly given that I've just been very appreciative of Lauren, Monica, and others, I'm sure, for watching internationally, that this film is only available to viewers in the UK and Ireland. It's an extremely new film. It was only released this month in the UK. It's called The Whalebone Box by Andrew Cotting, Long-Term Claire, the London, and it will only be available to viewers, sadly, in the UK and Ireland. But we do hope, of course, that it will travel on Mubi, perhaps, which is where it's being shown for those viewers internationally in the coming months. The Whalebone Box by Andrew Cotting and Ian Sinclair. We're going to come back and say formal thank yous in a minute, but now let's have a look at the trailer for the film.
I asked him where the whalebone came from, and he said it came from a washed-up whale after the whale had been smashed up as a result of a storm.
Thank you very much. So that is The Whalebone Box. It's an extraordinary new film, very much a kind of a sister, I think, to Here for Life in its in ambition in making, its imagination, its sense of empathy, its aspiration towards healing as well, I think, in lots of ways. Very different kind of film, of course. Andrew Kotick, a very different maker, but as I said at the beginning, he also trailer Here for Life, so there is a kindred spirit in that. So we'll be showing that from tomorrow until next Wednesday. Again, apologies that it's only available in the UK and Ireland at the moment, but we do a wide, very short in conversation with Ian Sinclair at the same time next week, Wednesday the 29th of April at 7 o'clock. If you want to be the first to get the information on all the LRB's activities, then of course do please subscribe both to the London Review of Books and also to the newsletter of the London Review Bookshop. They are different newsletters, both bring you remarkable exclusive content. The newsletter will be going out tomorrow with all the contact details for the viewing of the film. Many thanks to Mubi for making this special offer available to our audience. You'll be able to watch the film free for 30 days, along with everything else that Mubi has to offer. More on that next week when I come back to speak with Andrew and Ian. But thank you very much for joining us. Many thanks to everyone at the LRB, both the journal, the shop, and the entire organisation for making this possible. Particular thanks to Sam and to Anthony for making this particular event possible. Thanks, of course, to Andrea. Do like, comment, and subscribe, as the young people say. I never thought I would be saying that myself at this advanced time of my life, but I should be doing hand gestures now to point you to various parts of the YouTube screen where you can do those very things. Let's remind ourselves before we go that today is Earth Day, 50 years of the Earth Day as an idea after the first time that the Earth was seen entire from space. We have many, many challenges ahead of us. Coronavirus is only one of them. They are all threatening in their own way. We must, of course, work together and coexist in a temporary autonomous zone that lasts forever.